Now, I just mentioned a term called first vertex. This is extremely important all through Max, but especially in lofting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this circle that I'm using here, and I'm going to right-click on it, go into its... Actually, I'll convert it to an editable spline right now, just so I can get access to sub-object level editing. And I'm going to right-click and go into Properties, and I'm going to turn on a handy tool here called Vertex Ticks. Vertex Ticks. This works with both mesh objects and splines, but to me it's most handy on splines. And what that does is allows me to see the vertices of my spline, or 3D mesh, without being in sub-object mode. So I can see where my vertices are that are creating this particular structure right here. And if we look at that vertex, we notice that if we look at that shape, we notice that one of the vertices has a white box around it. That is called first vertex. And the term is very important, and its function within the lofting process and within animation also is very important. A closed spline like this, a circular spline that's closed, any vertex can be first vertex. If it's an open spline, either end can be first vertex. So that's going to be important to us at some point along the line. So just make note of that term, first vertex, and it's going to come up over and over. What I'm going to do is create another shape here. I'm going to come in and create a rectangular shape that's roughly the same size as that circle and kind of squarish. And again, I'll go into Convert to Editable Spline just in case I need to edit it later. And I will go into Properties and turn on Vertex Ticks. So you can see that both of these objects have 4 vertices. Each of them has one first vertex. That indicates that it's probably a closed spline. Now, once we start this loft process, we've got a cylinder that's been created. Any number of ways I could create a cylinder in 3D Studio Max. But again, a lot of times, the reason I would do it as a loft object is so that I've got flexibility later on down my editing path. I've got a lot of control in loft objects that I don't have anywhere else. Now, there's a couple of terms that I'm going to make you aware of here that, again, are very critical in the density of your mesh objects. If I right-click in my perspective label and turn on edged faces so that we can see both the wireframe and the shaded object together, and then come over here and look at the properties of this, I see that this cylinder has 332 triangular faces associated with it. Well, do I need that many faces to describe a cylinder? Probably not. If there's anything that I run into that is a deterrent to production in 3D Studio Max, especially in the visualization fields, it's too much overhead, too much geometry that you just don't need. So we're going to take a look at a couple of terms within 3D Studio Max lofting that are extremely important. I'm going to go into the rollout called the Skin Parameters rollout, and we're going to look at a couple of terms right here called shape steps and path steps. Now, I want you to write down the definition of this. Shape steps and path steps are intermediate steps. Shape steps and path steps are intermediate steps between vertices. Shape steps and path steps are intermediate steps between vertices that define curvature. That define curvature. Before I get myself into trouble, I'm going to go back here to my 0% on my loft level here. So 332 triangular faces make up this object, and if I rendered it, it would look like a decent cylinder for what I'm trying to build here. Well, I've got these steps over here that are intermediate steps between vertices that define curvature. Any curvature in my path? No. I can right-click on the path steps. spinner and set it to 0. That object now looks exactly the same. If I rendered it, it would look exactly the same. It is dropped from 332 faces down to 92 faces. Is that important? That is extremely important. The same visual object in your rendering that has considerably fewer faces. Considerably fewer faces. If I need to go back up, I can go back up. That's the beauty of lofting, is that we have this flexibility that you don't have in some of the other forms of modeling. Now, on the shape steps, the intermediate steps between vertices on the circle that define curvature, I'm going to start to decrement the number by 1. So I drop to 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Does that make a difference? Does it look like the same cylinder? Of course not. Because the circle has curvature, it needs those intermediate points to be able to show that curvature. So I'm limited, if I want to have that thing look like a cylinder, as to how low I can go here. So let me come back up, let me come back up here to, let me do 2. And if I render it, smoothing within the renderer makes it look like a cylinder still. If I can hide these end caps, it's going to look just fine. And I've dropped from 92 faces down to 44. Again, a considerable savings. You have the flexibility built into lofting that you don't have in other forms of modeling. This is going to be very critical. You could set up scripts that would tie that number to a camera, so that as your camera came closer to your objects, the density would increase and look better. As the camera drops back, it will go to a lower resolution object. I'll call it lower resolution, lower points. So very, very important control that you have within this process. I'm going to kick these back up to 5 each. That is the default that you get into. And this gets people into a lot of trouble. Lofting curbs, if you're a civil engineer, curbs, you can have miles of them in a typical scene. And if you loft them with these settings, your render times will just plummet. You can't deal with it. So you need this optimization process. Now, if you look at our loft object here, we have this green line at the bottom. It's a green circle, actually. It is not the circle itself that is on the loft path. It is an instance clone of the circle that's on the loft path. There's another important function of what we're doing here. If I come back to my original circle, I go in here to modify subobject vertex, grab a vertex, and just adjust it a little bit. Let me zoom out here. Whoops. How come that? Why isn't there a connection? Didn't I make that an instance when I did that? Because I converted to an editable spline after I did the loft process. Not a real big deal. Not a real big deal at this point. If we got a much more complex loft path going and a loft object going, then it might make a difference. But at this point, all I have to do is come in here in the Modify panel for the loft object. The Modify panel for the loft object is come in here and do a Get Shape again, and it simply replaces the shape that was on 0% of the way along the path. So it simply replaces it. You can replace it as often as you want. I can go to this rectangle if I want. Now, the next thing that we want to look at, and this throws people off, is here clearly, let me select both of these objects, get out of Get Shape mode. Right here, clearly I can see that there is some discrepancy in the orientation of what I've drawn here to what I'm getting as an end result here. There's a 180-degree discrepancy there.